When we picture ancient empires, we often imagine, constant warfare and chaos, right? Dusty, dangerous
Yeah,
roads.
that's the common image.
But what if I told you that in Babylon nearly 4,000 years ago, a private citizen could travel hundreds of miles from their doorstep in Babylon all the way to the Mediterranean safely in their own carriage?
That really shifts the perspective, doesn't it?
That level of peace, the Pax Babylonica, it isn't just an interesting fact. It fundamentally sort of redefines what we thought was possible back then.
It absolutely does. I mean, that image points to a level of societal structure and legal order that might genuinely surprise a lot of people.
And that's exactly what we're doing today.
Yeah,
A deep dive into the fascinating, sometimes harsh, but yeah, remarkably sophisticated world of Babylonian law.
sounds great.
Our mission is to unpack its historical foundations, see what these laws actually reveal about Babylonian society, its values, and then trace their pretty remarkable lasting legacy through history.
And we've got an incredible amount of source material for this. I mean, thousands of actual contracts, legal decisions, royal decrees, even like private letters.
Wow.
Yeah, it gives us this unparalleled window into their daily lives. And of course, right at the heart of it all, you have the famous Code of Hammurabi.
The big one.
Exactly. It really forms the backbone of, how we understand things.
So get ready to journey back in time with us and discover how a civilization from almost 4 millennia ago tried to create order, dispense justice, and govern everything from, like, the price of beer to the rules of adoption.
Hmm.
You'll find it reveals some truly surprising connections to our own world. Let's dig in.
Let's do it.
So let's start right at the beginning, the historical foundations. Babylonian law isn't just this single thing. It's a specific subset of what's called cuneiform law, right?
That's right. And what makes it stand out for us today, really, is the sheer volume of stuff that survived. Archaeologically speaking.
You mean like tablets?
Exactly. Thousands of surviving contracts, property deeds, sales, loans, receipts, you name it. Plus, actual legal decisions from their courts. It's an incredible treasure trove.
So not just laws, but how they were used.
Precisely.
Hmm.
These aren't just, dry legal texts. They give us this unique, really granular look into how people lived, worked, interacted. It's like a time capsule of their everyday life.
That gives us a much richer picture than we get for a lot of other ancient cultures, I bet.
Oh, absolutely.
And all this material, it really clarifies the role of the main figure here, King Hammurabi. We know he was ambitious, a conqueror, but how did he actually manage to implement such a uniform legal system across his, well, huge empire, making Babylon the legal center?
It's fascinating how successful he was at it. His code wasn't just some decree that faded away. It became the central pillar for understanding Babylonian law for, like, over 1,500 years. Copies were studied, divided into chapters, recopied for centuries. It really highlights its significance, its role as the definitive legal reference. It was a statement of power, sure, but also a really practical tool for governing.
Okay, so Hammurabi's code was clearly a huge leap forward. It moved beyond just tribal customs. But did it completely shake off all those older traditions? Or were there still some, primitive justice ideas hanging around?
That's a great question because it really does signal this sophisticated shift towards centralized governance, state law.
Right.
But yeah, some older elements did remain. Things like family solidarity, where the family might be collectively responsible,
Okay.
and the famous lex talionis, eye for an eye.
Yeah.
That was definitely still
Sorry,
there.
forget that one.
No. But the overall move was towards a more formalized state-controlled system. Things like blood feuds or marriage by capture, which you see in more tribal setups, they're noticeably absent from the code.
So the state is taking charge. How did Hammurabi position himself in all this? You often hear him called a benevolent autocrat. What did that actually mean for, like, the average Joe seeking justice?
Well, it meant he presented himself as accessible, willing to protect the weak, even against the powerful. You could actually appeal directly to the king.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which suggests a system that was, at least in theory, striving for accountability. Judges were strictly supervised, appeals were recognized, and the code itself often says what the king's decision would be in certain cases.
So not just random whim, there was a structure.
Exactly. An underlying push for consistency and fairness, even within an autocratic system.
And that consistency, that order, it actually impacted daily life in ways that might surprise us, right? We talked about that safe travel.
The Pax Babylonica, yeah.
From Babylon to the Mediterranean, plus they had a regular postal system. And sources describe women's position as free and dignified. It really does make you rethink things.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
This stability wasn't just an idea, it was real. It fostered trade, communication, and even gave women a degree of rights and maybe mobility we wouldn't expect.
It points to a highly organized society way beyond just basic survival.
Totally. It challenges that whole narrative of primitive antiquity. This was sophisticated in its daily workings, its social fabric, much more than we often give it credit for.
That organization really structured everything, didn't it? Right down to how people were categorized. Which brings us to how the code defined society through these intricate class divisions.
Yes, exactly. You basically had three main groups. First, the Avalum. Originally, think patrician, the elite.
Top tier.
Right. Full civil rights, aristocratic privileges, but also responsibilities. They faced heavier penalties for crimes. But crucially, they could also demand direct retaliation, the lex talionis, if they were injured.
An eye for an eye applied to them and by them.
Precisely. What's interesting, though, is that over time, Avalon became more of a general courtesy title, used for almost anyone, regardless of their actual wealth or background.
Huh. Okay, then there's the Mushkanu class. You mentioned this one is debated. How do we best understand them? Not elite, but not slaves either.
The Mushkanu. Yeah, historians debate this one a lot. Perhaps think of them as sort of free commoners.
Okay.
They were free, lived, and worked, but maybe didn't own significant land. Their legal status was distinct, like, if injured, they received monetary compensation, not retaliation.
So a different standard of justice there.
A different standard, yeah. They paid smaller fees and fines, too, and often lived in a separate city quarter, a distinct, maybe more vulnerable, but still vital part of society.
And finally, the Ardu, the slave class. You said they were numerous, they were considered property, chattel, but it wasn't totally black and white.
Right. Slaves were acquired in various ways, bought abroad, captured in war, or even freemen downgraded because of debt or crime.
So multiple paths into slavery.
Yes. And in daily life, masters had to provide for them food, clothing, medical care. But compensation for injury went to the master, not the slave.
Makes sense if they're property, but were there paths out?
Definitely. A slave could buy their own freedom. They could be freed and dedicated to a temple. Or, significantly, they could be adopted.
Adopted, like into a family.
Yes, and that could even elevate their status potentially up to the Avalon class.
Yeah.
So it wasn't always a life sentence.
But slavery was still common, right? Given how important it seems economically, how did they handle runaways in such a big territory?
Oh, very common. And the code was strict. If you caught a runaway, you got a reward from the owner. But if you helped a runaway or harbored them,
Let me guess. Death penalty.
death penalty, exactly. Slaves also had an identification mark, probably a brand or tattoo, and trying to remove it was a serious crime itself.
Shows how vital slave labor was to their system and how determined the state was to control it.
Absolutely. The rules really underscore their economic importance.
Okay, shifting from people to property. Land ownership is fascinating here, starting with the divine connection. The idea that the city god owned the land originally.
Precisely. The god was the ultimate owner, and the king acted as the god's representative, his vice-regent. Citizens were essentially tenants, paying fixed dues.
Like rent to the temple or the king?
Sort of, yeah. But over time, the code clearly recognizes complete private ownership of land.
So it evolved.
It did, though that privately owned land was still subject to certain fixed charges. However, the king had the power to grant exemptions from those charges, often as a reward for state service.
Okay, so a mix of divine legacy and emerging private property rights.
A very practical evolution, yeah.
And the temple. It wasn't just a religious place, was it? You mentioned it played a huge economic and social role, almost like a social safety net.
That's a really critical point. Temples had huge estates, received tithes, offering significant income. They weren't just for worship. They were major granaries, storehouses for the city.
Keeping the food supply stable.
Exactly. And crucially, they were also the city archives, holding vast numbers of records, legal documents.
In memory of the city.
In a way, yes. But the safety net part is also key. If a citizen was captured by enemies and couldn't afford ransom,
The temple paid.
the temple of their city was obligated to pay the ransom,
Wow, that's quite a responsibility.
isn't it? And for poor farmers, say, needing seed or supplies to get through the year, the temple would provide these as interest-free loans.
Interest-free.
Yep. It shows a really quite sophisticated form of ancient social support. It wasn't just charity, it was part of the system. Points to a really interconnected society.
And speaking of systems, if you wanted to do any kind of transaction, buying, selling, loaning, the written contract was absolutely everything, wasn't it?
Paramount. The code is explicit. Claims had to be backed up by documents or the oath of witnesses.
No handshake deals.
Definitely not for anything important. Written contracts, receipts,
Yeah.
they were literally a matter of life and death. If you bought stolen goods or even legitimate property but without proper documentation, and you couldn't prove the purchase,
Trouble.
severe penalties, up to execution.
Seriously. For bad paperwork.
It sounds extreme, but it drove this deep reliance on verifiable records. It made the market, the economy, incredibly predictable and stable for its time. Everyone knew the rules.
That focus on predictability, it seems like it extended to almost every daily transaction. The code's grip was amazing. You mentioned rules for every type of lease imaginable.
Oh yeah, grain fields, date groves, even rules for reclaiming wasteland. They had fixed rent options, profit-sharing options.
And fixed wages, too, for farm labor.
Fixed wages for sowers, herdsmen, shepherds, field laborers, even oxen drivers. Specific amounts laid out in the code.
What does that tell us, that level of detail?
It tells us they envisioned a highly ordered, predictable economic system. They wanted to minimize disputes, make sure everyone knew their obligations and rights. It's like a blueprint for commerce designed to remove guesswork and foster stability.
Essential for their trade networks, I guess.
Absolutely. Both internal economy and external trade.
Okay, what about debt? That must have been a constant worry for many people. How did that work? Especially this concept of mancipium.
Debt was intensely personal. It was often secured on the debtor's own person or their family. Distraint on their essential grain stores was forbidden, but a debtor could nominate a mancipium, basically a hostage.
A hostage? Like who?
Often their wife, child, or a slave they owned. This person would then work for the creditor to pay off the debt.
Wow. For how long?
It wasn't indefinite. The code put limits. A wife or child could only be held for 3 years. And there were protections against cruelty if the creditor's abuse led to the death of the mancipium.
Then what?
The creditor had to pay with a life from their own family. A son, for instance, if it was the debtor's son who died.
Grim but structured. Were there other ways to handle debt?
Yes, pledging property was common. There were rules for deferring payment if crops failed due to storms or drought. And personal guarantees, someone else vouching for the debtor, were also used. It's a harsh system, definitely, but one with clear rules and boundaries.
And the Babylonian economy, it clearly wasn't just farming and local stuff. It sounds like trade was huge.
Incredibly extensive. Merchants would give goods or money to traveling agents, think caravans, maybe ships. These agents went looking for markets.
And the code covered that too.
Oh yes. Detailed rules for accountability, how profits were split, penalties if the agent made false claims about losses. There was a big forwarding business, shipping goods, and river traffic on the Euphrates and the canals was vital.
So rules for boats as well.
Shipbuilding guarantees, the captain's responsibility for the cargo and the ship itself. It was a really bustling, regulated commercial world. That legal backbone was essential for it to function.
And here's another detail that really shows how deeply law permeated everyday life, even in surprising places. The tavern. You mentioned the tavern keeper, usually a woman, had legal duties.
This is a fantastic example. The code regulated liquor traffic, even set fixed prices for beer.
Price controls on beer.
Seems so. But more importantly, the tavern keeper, the alewife, was held responsible under penalty of death.
Death again? For what?
For allowing disorderly conduct, or worse, allowing treasonous talk or assembly in her establishment. She had to report offenders, take them to the palace.
So the barmaid was basically part of the surveillance system.
It strongly implies a pretty efficient and accessible police system, doesn't it? Reaching right into social hubs. It suggests a high level of state control over public order, even in casual settings. Shows their commitment to stability.
Quite the system indeed. Let's shift now to the foundation of society, family, and justice within it. How did marriage work in Babylon? Was it just a transaction?
Well, it had elements of a purchase, yes, but fundamentally the code treats it as a contract.
A written contract again?
Absolutely. Marriage was usually arranged by relatives, there was a bride price paid by the groom's side, and importantly, a dowry provided by the bride's family.
And the dowry, that was the wife's.
Yes, it remained her property for life and then passed to her children. It was crucial protection for her. And that marriage contract, it was essential. Without a written contract, the code explicitly stated the woman was no wife.
Legally, the contract was the marriage.
Pretty much.
So what if that contract broke down? Divorce. Was it fair for both sides?
Fair is tricky. Divorce was primarily the husband's choice. If he divorced her, he had obligations. He had to give back her dowry.
Okay, that's something.
And if they had children, she usually got custody, and he had to provide funds for their upbringing. So not totally without responsibility.
But could the wife initiate divorce?
It was much harder. She could bring an action against him for cruelty or neglect. If she proved her case in court, she could get a judicial separation and take her dowry back.
Okay, but what if she couldn't prove it?
If she failed to prove her case, and she was found to be at fault a bad wife, neglecting her duties or leaving him without cause, the consequence was, well, drowning.
Drowning, for being a bad wife.
Yes. It highlights a very clear imbalance in power within the marriage, legally speaking.
Definitely. Given the importance of heirs back then, what about childbearing? What if a wife couldn't have children? And what was the deal with concubines?
Monogamy seems to have been the general rule. But yes, if a wife was childless, she had the option of giving her husband a maidservant specifically to bear children.
And those children?
They were legally considered the children of the wife. It was a way to ensure the family line continued.
Okay. And concubines?
Concubinage was also permitted. These were typically free women, sometimes even dowered. Their children were legitimate heirs, sharing in the inheritance, and the concubine herself had legal protections, similar divorce conditions to a wife.
So quite complex family structures were possible under law.
Very much so, always with an eye towards inheritance and continuing the family.
And the father's authority over his children. How extensive was that?
Pretty extensive until the child married. The father controlled their labor, their wages. He even had the right to pledge them as mancipium for his debts, or even sell them in some circumstances.
Wow. And inheritance.
Upon the father's death, all legitimate children, sons and daughters, shared equally in his estate, although there were provisions to ensure unmarried daughters received a dowry from the estate first.
Interesting. Okay, you mentioned adoption earlier. It was common, often for old age care. But the rules around it seem incredibly harsh. This brings us to another really stark point. Those punishments for adopted kids who weren't dutiful, eye or tongue torn out.
It is stark, isn't it? This shows the absolute paramount importance placed on filial duty, respecting your parents, and the sanctity of contracts in Babylon.
The adoption itself was a contract.
Exactly. The fact that these extreme physical punishments existed, side by side with the fact that adopted children could be full heirs, even named the primary heir, it just reveals this deep societal need for loyalty and fulfilling obligations. These were seen as fundamental to holding the family, and thus society, together.
Okay, let's turn to the criminal code. This is probably what most people associate with Babylonian law, that ruling principle. Lex talionis, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, limb for limb. We know the phrase, but how literally did they take it?
Oh, very literally. Especially for assaults on an avlum, that upper class.
So the retaliation depended on the victim's status.
Yes. If you injured an avlum, you suffered the same injury. If you struck your father, your hand could be cut off. If a wet nurse was found to have deliberately switched the baby she was nursing, her breast could be cut off.
Brutal. What about things like perjury?
Perjury, in a capital case, could mean death. Lying under oath could lead to having your tongue cut out. It was direct, physical, symbolic retaliation. A very clear, if brutal, deterrent.
And the death penalty itself seems to have been used a lot.
Very much so. For a huge range of crimes.
Yeah.
Theft from a temple or palace, kidnapping, helping slaves escape, burglary.
Yeah.
Many things carried a death sentence.
And the methods varied.
Yes,
Yeah.
the code often specified. Yibiting, displaying the body for certain types of burglary, burning alive for things like incest or looting during a house fire, and drowning was common too for adultery, as we mentioned, or the bad wife.
The severity was clearly meant to send a message.
Absolutely. Strong deterrence reflecting how seriously they viewed these disruptions to order.
Which brings us to maybe the most shocking application of lex talionis. This idea of collective or proxy responsibility. This one really challenges modern ideas of justice.
It's incredibly difficult for us to wrap our heads around today, definitely. The code stated, for example, if a builder built a house so poorly that it collapsed and killed the owner's son.
Then the builder was executed.
No, the builder's son was put to death.
What?
Son for son. Similarly, if a creditor's cruelty caused the death of a debtor's child, held as mancipium, The creditor's own child could be put to death.
That's staggering. It extends eye for an eye to the
Yeah, it's like
family.
it highlights this concept of collective responsibility within families that feels completely alien to us now. It shows the extreme value placed on the life and safety of the Avalum class, even if justice was served, in our view, by proxy.
Were there any considerations for intent, or was it always just outcome-based?
There were some nuances. For instance, if someone killed another unintentionally in a quarrel, the penalty might be a fine based on the victim's status, not necessarily death. So intent wasn't entirely ignored, but the outcome, especially involving an avalum, often dictated the harsh response.
Okay, finally, let's touch on the judicial process itself. If you had a legal dispute, what actually happened?
Well, lawsuits were formal procedures. Interestingly, there were no professional lawyers or advocates like we have.
So you represented yourself.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Pleas had to be submitted in writing. Judges, often sitting with a panel of elders from the community, would review the written plea, then summon the parties and their witnesses.
And evidence.
Oaths were incredibly important, sworn before the gods. And for things considered beyond human knowing, like suspected witchcraft or maybe adultery that couldn't be proven, with witnesses they used the ordeal by water.
The river ordeal, how did that work?
The accused would be thrown into the sacred river, likely the Euphrates. The belief was the river god would decide. The innocent would float, the guilty would sink and drown.
Trial by drowning, basically.
In essence, yes, for those specific difficult cases. But for most disputes, written evidence, contracts, receipts, witness statements recorded on tablets was heavily relied upon. Court decisions were meticulously recorded, sealed by judges and witnesses, and copies given to the parties involved.
Very bureaucratic, in a way.
Very. And importantly, remember that appeal to the king was always a possibility, reinforcing that central authority.
It's just incredible to think that these legal precedents set down almost 4,000 years ago lasted so long. How did Babylonian law actually influence later legal systems? Did it just disappear when Babylon fell?
Not at all, actually. The core legal precedents, the way things were done in private life contracts, family law, they remained largely in force, even through conquests by the Persians, the Greeks, the Parthians.
So daily life just carried on under the old rules.
To a large extent, yes. And what's more remarkable is that these traditions, this legal thinking, survived and seem to have influenced later systems. There are threads that connect to Roman law, for instance.
And Roman law, of course, shaped so much of Western legal tradition.
Exactly. So elements of this ancient Mesopotamian system really did ripple outwards across millennia, informing how later civilizations thought about and structured their laws.
So Hammurabi's code, being so carefully arranged, so logical, it really set a precedent for the whole idea of codified law, didn't it? A written, systematic set of rules.
That's a hugely significant point. The code wasn't just a random list of judgments. It was organized, thematic. It covered different areas of life systematically.
Which we kind of take for granted today.
We do. But that systematic approach laid the groundwork for how we think about law as a coherent system, something that can be known and accessed, not just a tangle of customs or rulings. It's arguably the birth of what we'd recognize as a modern legal framework concept: order, consistency, knowability.
And when you look at what it covered, class, property, family, the king's role, trade, it really feels like an early, explicit attempt at a comprehensive social contract, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's a fascinating early example of a society trying to deliberately define the rights and responsibilities of everyone, from the king down to the slave.
A framework for how people should interact.
Exactly. How conflicts get resolved, how order is maintained. It lays out the terms for living together in a complex state. It makes you think, today we often put family bonds first, but in Babylon it seems the written contract, the oath, those were often the absolute bedrock, sometimes even more binding than blood ties.
From the harshness of lex talionis to the tiny details about renting an ox, these ancient laws reveal this timeless human drive for justice, for fairness, even if their idea of fairness looks very different from ours today.
Indeed. It shows that the basic challenges of organizing a society, keeping order, defining rights, punishing wrongs, making the economy work, these are ancient problems. The solutions vary, but the underlying needs persist.
Well, we've journeyed through the surprising sophistication and, yes, the often harsh realities of Babylonian law. We've looked at its historical roots, what it tells us about their society, and its really profound, enduring influence.
It's really a testament to humanity's ongoing quest for order, for justice, and trying to define right and wrong, even across such huge spans of time.
So here's something to think about. What does the meticulous detail of a 4,000-year-old legal code, governing everything from irrigation channels to the price of beer, tell you about our fundamental human need for predictability and accountability in society? And maybe how much has truly changed in our basic pursuit of justice over all these millennia?